Shalom, WJC family. It is time for our weekly Torah talk. This week in synagogue, we will be reading Parshat Emor from the book of Vayikra. We're now sort of across the halfway point, and God continues to tell the Jewish people advice about what it means to build and create a holy society. What we find in chapter 23 of Vayikra in the book of Leviticus is a description of all of the holidays. I wanted to discuss these holidays in light of a phenomenon I've seen certainly going on over the last couple of weeks. You might have felt it too. As crazy and difficult as the last 2+ years have been with a pandemic, over the last few weeks, there has been a sense of burnout and stress, and all of those feelings are amped up again. And it's weird because it's springtime and it's beautiful out, and yet we're feeling worse. Many of us just stretched in 100 directions and very frazzled. And things that were that we were able to deal with, even if they were kind of annoying and difficult before this moment, are actually feeling harder and more difficult to deal with. My question is why. I've been feeling this, by the way. I don't mind admitting. And the more I speak to other people, the more I hear that they are feeling this as well. So what's going on, right? Why are we amped up more? And I couldn't really figure it out until a wise person said to me, there's a war. And this pandemic isn't going away, even if it's changed and maybe it's less dangerous. It's no less disruptive to life. Maybe not no less disruptive to life, but it's still disruptive to life. And there's changes in American politics that are feeling difficult to struggle with. There's anti-Semitism. There are challenges in Israel, terror attacks. Boy, the world is it's a lot of news coming at us that's very difficult. And yet we're not really talking about it that much, about any of these things. And a part of it, I feel like maybe we just learned during the pandemic to put our heads down and trudge along and say, I'm fine, it's fine. But now some of those, you can't do that forever. And some of those barriers are breaking down, probably for the best. The stressors in our lives are definitely not going away. If anything, there's more. And because we're starting from this, low to medium grade stress place already, then the little things that we could deal with when we were less stressed, they're just overwhelming. And I think a lot of us are having that experience. The Torah understood that this would happen to people, right? That they would be torn in many different directions, often using the pulls on our attention as distractions from the really important things going on around us. And also realize that that's not the healthiest thing. So the Torah builds in a way to deal with this. And that way is to give us control of time by forcing us to stop and to look around and to assess what is really important and what is less important, and to pay attention to the important things going around us, even when we might prefer not to. And we see that in chapter 23 of Leviticus, when we get these rules of the festivals. We're told, actually twice basically, in verse 2, God says to Moses, Daber el bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, ve'amarta alehem, and say to them, Moadei Adonai asher tikra'u otam. These are the fixed times of Adonai. Mikrei Kodesh Elahem Moadai, which you shall proclaim as Kodesh, as sacred occasions, as separate times. And then it says, it describes Shabbat in verse 3. And in verse 4, it says again, Ela Moadei Adonai Mikrai Kodesh. These are the set times of Adonai, the ones called Kodesh, called holy. Asher Tikra'u Otam B'Moadam, that you shall Tikra'u, that you shall call out B'Moadam, in their appointed times. So the rabbis ask, why this repetition? Why verse 2 and verse 4? And there are a bunch of answers. I want to share some of the answer of Rabbeinu Bachya right now. And he says that, what God is saying these are the sacred times, is that these sacred times are eternal. That there are some things in the world that don't change, and that will keep you going, even as all of the turmoil and the chaos swirls around us, the wars and the refugee crisis and the atrocities and the anti-Semitism and the geopolitics and the national politics. Even as all of these things swirl around us and make it hard even to get through a day, God calls out Shabbatot as holy, as separate. Kodesh, separate, sacred time. And God called out these holidays, these holy days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, as holy, as separate. And says Rabbeinu Bachya, these are eternal. In fact, he tells a story that a non-Jewish person who liked to come to Rabbi Akiva and kind of like poke at him and try and prove him wrong, he says, I read Isaiah, and Isaiah says, God doesn't want your festivals anymore. They don't satisfy me. So why do you keep the festivals? And Rabbi Akiva said, God says he doesn't like your festivals, meaning people's festivals, the one that we create. But God still loves the festivals he gave us. So what does that mean? That means we keep making sacred time. This is sacred and that's sacred. Maybe the holidays that we observe, national holidays and secular holidays and these kinds of things, and maybe even more recently created Jewish holidays. But I think more than that, it's that we say this is sacred or that is sacred. We take unimportant things and raise them up. We are masters of doing that in our culture, taking unimportant times and unimportant things and raising them up like they are the most important things around. And God, says Rabbi Akiva in interpreting Isaiah, says I don't need, those aren't my sacred times. Those are just more chasing your tail, more running after the next best thing. No, I gave you sacred times. I gave you a rhythm of the calendar year, a sacred rhythm. And I gave you festivals and holidays to give you control that on these days I'm going to stop chasing my tail. I'm going to stop looking for the next best thing. I'm going to stop distracting myself from the things going on around me that are really important, where I might need to engage or certainly need to get settled with what's going on. And those are Tikra'u Kodesh. Those are called, we shall call them Kodesh. We shall make them holy. And when we do, when we stop and we observe the Moadim, the sacred times, God's sacred times, instead of trying to make our own sacred idols, that's when we'll be fulfilling this passage. That's when we'll be fulfilling what Rabbi Akiva has in mind. That we can live on God's time and prioritize our lives in a sacred way. It's not easy, and it doesn't always feel great, but it leads to more meaning. It can lead to better relationships, more love, more enjoyment, more true happiness, more peace in our lives. Yeah, we might have to give some things up. Some very fun distractions, or face things that we don't want to face, that are difficult to face. But when we do, and we figure out how to make a difference and how to move forward on the path God meant for us despite these things, that's when all those other good things, the meaning and the happiness and the joy and the peace, we make room for them in our lives by making room for them in our time on the Shabbats that God declares and on the Moadim, the holidays that we declare. So the next holiday coming up is Shavuot. I guess the next holiday coming up is Shabbat. This Friday night and Saturday and every Friday night and Saturday, and then Shavuot. And I hope you'll join us. And I hope you'll, in whatever way you choose is the right way for you, set aside these sacred times. Take a little control of time. Maybe we'll all be able to lift ourselves up from this sense of frustrated stress and burning the candles at both ends and just, chasing our tails. Let's chase some better things for a while. Shabbat Shalom.